we're going to go ahead and get started. It's a little bit past 5:30. And so I'm going to start with just thank you to all of you for coming, but also in particular, I want to thank Dean Daisy Singh and the library for hosting our salon event here tonight. Thank you, Daisy. I think she is hoping that you will all make yourselves at home and grab some food and make this your space. And we're sorry to the folks on Zoom that you can't enjoy the food because it smells delicious. So I'll say that much. A couple of quick announcements. There is a sign-in sheet that we're going to be passing around. So if you could please sign in there, that would be really helpful. And we're really hoping that this is a dialogue. We're going to hope that you bring questions or ask for clarifications. That goes for folks in the room and on Zoom. But we are going to run a mic in the room. And so please wait until the mic comes to you so that everybody on Zoom can hear your question. So I think those are like the logistic kind of shopkeeping. We're going to start by doing a round of introductions. And in full transparency, I haven't met some of the speakers who are joining us here today. And so I'm really grateful to the folks on Zoom who are joining us. And they're an alum from UMaine, but also some of Dr. Bunnell's colleagues. And they're going to introduce themselves to you and a little bit about their role with pedagogical partnerships. I'm not going to do those introductions because I want to bring their voices in. And my role, along with Lily, is just as a facilitator to keep the conversation moving and run the mic around and other things like that. So I think what we'll do is maybe just I'll ask the folks to introduce themselves. Maybe we'll start with you, Sarah, and then we'll hop to the folks on Zoom, and mainly just an introduction in your relationship to pedagogical partnerships, kind of how you've been involved in them. And I'll say that we will define that term for you shortly, but just to kind of put everyone in context.
That's great. Can everybody hear me okay? Is my mic okay? All right. Yeah, great. So my name's Sarah Bunnell. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the director of the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning and an associate professor of psychology at Elon University. Prior to that, I was at Amherst College. And so that's how I connected with these two amazing folks who are joining from a little bit south of here, but still cold. And my connection to pedagogical partnership runs fairly far back in my own educational journey. I look to our visiting grad students here that I started participating in pedagogical partnership and then first as a partner and then partnering with students when I was still a grad student. And then became really transformed by thinking about power sharing and co-designing in the classroom. What are the ways that we can create more agency for students? What are the ways that we can bring ourselves out of a space of solitude and into community as we think about course design and redesign, and who are the students that we're reaching? So I have co-designed pedagogical partnership programs, including, there's a number of resources for the Amherst College pedagogical partnership program on that handout. And I also have co-facilitated and supported the Being Human in STEM initiative, which Sheila and Zach can talk more about, which is a student partnership course. And I'm really excited to be here with you all to think about what are the ways that this kind of pedagogical framework might help invite more voices in and more excitement into our classroom spaces. So thank you, Karen, for letting us be here.
Thank you, Sarah. Lily, would you like to go next?
Sure. Also, I don't know if you said this, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating it, but also thanks to the Provost Office for supporting Dr. Bunnell's visit and to all of you who've met with her during this time, and also again to our guests on Zoom. I'm Lily Hirakova. I'm an associate professor in communication and journalism. I have an informal relationship with pedagogical partnerships that I hope will deepen in terms of valuing really learning from students' experiences in class and shaping teaching through their feedback, but nothing formal as in a program that supports training students and so on.
Thanks. And so now I'm going to ask our speakers on Zoom if you could wouldn't mind unmuting. So I'm going to ask Dr. Sheila Jaswell if you could start, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Hi, everyone. Nice to be joining you in Maine from here in Massachusetts. I am a professor of chemistry. I'm in my 16th year here at Amherst College, and I kind of fell into an organic pedagogical partnership when students asked me to help co-design a course called Being Human in STEM after we had a student protest in 2015. And so that course, Being Human in STEM, has continued to be a pretty student-driven, student-centered experiment. And in addition to that, I participated in the P3 program, which is what Amherst calls its pedagogical partnership program. And I was an official pedagogical partner, co-partner with another faculty member and I, who were co-teaching a course that we had a trained student pedagogical partner who was not a biochemistry and biophysics major, but was partnering with us in our capstone course of molecular and cellular biophysics. So that was a really fun experience, and I'll be happy to share more as the conversation continues.
Thank you. And maybe we'll go to Zach next.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hi, everybody. My name is Zach. I'm a recent Amherst College graduate. So I graduated in the class of 2024. And currently I work with Dr. J. I'm the Being Human academic fellow. So I work not only like helping to design some of the lesson plans for the course, but also sort of offering that student perspective, as I was someone who took the Being Human in STEM class in the spring of 2023. So I had a really good experience of seeing the pedagogical partnership from the student-facing side, and now shifting into my role as someone who administrates some of the pedagogical partnership and facilitates some of the learning around it. So it's been a really great experience, and it's very great to be a recent grad and have this great opportunity to speak to you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you to kind of being willing to join us here today from Amherst. And we're really excited to hear about your stories. And I'd like to finish up by inviting a UMaine alum, and that's Hope Carroll, to kind of share what her experience has been with partnership or partnership adjacent type program.
Hi, everyone. My name's Hope. I graduated last year from UMaine. And my experience with pedagogical partnerships came in my junior year. I was a research assistant on the Gateways to Success project with Lily and Karen, where I observed a number of first-year classes being taught by TAs, and then kind of use this experience to dive into my honors thesis in my senior year, where I interviewed a number of first years in classes to explore how classroom communication impacts first-year success.
Thanks, Hope, and thank you to you as well for joining us remotely. It's really nice to see you again. And I think I forgot to introduce myself, so I'll just come back around and say, so I'm Karen Pelletreau. I think I know most of you here, and I work at the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning. And just to put a little bit of context, this whole visit and this conversation stemmed out of work from a group of faculty here at UMaine that are Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Fellows hosted at CITL. And we had the opportunity to attend a virtual summit where Dr. Bunnell was a keynote speaker. And there was a lot of energy around what she was sharing about this pedagogical partnerships. And so that group kind of inquired, would we be able to bring her expertise here? And so that's kind of where this whole event and the talks around it evolved from. And so you have a little bit, those of you who are new to this, a little bit of a background, but maybe Sarah, I'll pass it to you to just maybe expand. What are we saying when we say pedagogical partnerships, and how is that different from being a TA or being a peer mentor? And kind of, yeah, we'll start with that. And then I'll also just say, please ask questions at any point. We really want to know what you'd like to know more about this.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. And thanks to everybody for being here. And thanks to you all for joining us. So pedagogical partnerships, and I apologize to folks who already have expertise in this, so please add if there are pieces that feel important that I haven't named about them. But 30,000 foot view, It's where you work collaboratively with a student focused on the design and ongoing iteration of a course. The student is not enrolled in the course per se, and often they have not taken the course. They don't hold disciplinary expertise in the course, although you can have models like Zach is one model, and others where a student has taken the course before and then becomes a consultant in the course. That's not required in a pedagogical partnership. Allison Cook-Sather and Kathy Bovell and Peter Felton have written a lot about defining pedagogical partnership. And on the handout, there's a link to an open access book about pedagogical partnership out of Elon that I highly recommend. The resources linked to it are fantastic. But what's a key principle of a pedagogical partnership is a recognition that a student and faculty member can contribute equally to the teaching and learning in a course, although they don't contribute the same thing, right? Students have expertise in being students, right? And they have an expert student lens into their own experience in the classroom and a closer experience to be able to reflect the experiences of other students in the class. We hold expertise in the discipline, right? And our experience in teaching in the discipline. And so when we're inviting students into partnership, we're inviting students to help us see our classroom differently, more richly, with different perspectives, and then to think together with us about what's working for whom, in what ways, and how do we know. So in a pedagogical partnership program, students are trained in how to do classroom observation. They are trained to do observation without evaluation, right? To capture what's happening in this particular class, focused on what is it that the faculty member and the student have jointly identified as being important to try to work on in that course. So it might mean, how do I foster more collaboration in the classroom? Or I want to enhance discussion, or I want to increase students' ability to read deeply and bring those ideas into discussion, or I want to enhance writing, or want to think about whatever is happening with AI in the current state of higher education as it pertains to my class. And then the student each week goes into the classroom and takes these observation notes and shares them with you as their pedagogical partner. And you jointly debrief. Here's what I was trying to accomplish. Here's what you saw. What do we think? What was working? What do we want to interrogate? What do we want to know more about? And it's an ongoing iterative conversation that continues through the semester. It is different than a TA role. It is different than having a co-instructor in the class, in that you're really working to try to bring down power hierarchy within the relationship, while also recognizing that you're not in equivalent roles, but you are jointly committed to the success of the course. So we run training programs to prepare students to be able to do this work. How do I do observation? How do I listen actively? How do I serve as a partner? And then we work with faculty too to prepare them for this work. And then they partner together to redesign and step into the course. And it really has been a transformative pedagogical practice for so many folks who participated in it.
Questions from anyone? Those of you who are new to this concept, like what's resonating with you?
So thanks for illustrating us. It's rather interesting topic and concept. I was wondering if from your experience, there are disciplines or courses that are more easily adaptable to this pedagogy than others, or you think it will be just the same for all?
So I don't think any course is just the same, but certainly I would say it's less about the course and more about faculty and student readiness to meaningfully step into partnership, right? And this is true in all areas, I would say, in higher ed, when we try to bring in more student voice or more stakeholders, but we don't actually give them agency and space to meaningfully contribute, then we've set this up to be a false partnership. And so it's more thinking about, is the faculty member actually ready to be vulnerable to some extent, to name, here's the question that I have about what's working. I haven't figured this all out. I don't have all the answers in terms of how to solve this on my own. And in fact, I would prefer not to have to do this on my own, right? That teaching and course redesign is often quite isolating work, right? We feel quite solitary and that we have to be the person to solve all of these problems and meet all of our students' needs. And pedagogical partnership allows us, if we allow students in meaningfully, right, to share that work and to make that more inquiry-driven and invitational. Just as an example in terms of stretch of courses, so Sheila named a capstone course that's a really high level course in biochem biophysics that students have a really hard time engaging with the literature and even knowing, right, how do I accomplish what it is that the faculty are asking me to do? Because I'm asking, right, I'm trying to get them to engage with questions where we don't actually know the answers yet. That's really destabilizing for students, particularly high performing students. On the other extreme, last semester, we had a partnership where a student partnered with a first semester Spanish instructor, where the student partner didn't speak Spanish, right? And it was an incredibly successful partnership because what the faculty partner wanted was someone to help her think about how do I help students learn how to take notes? How do I help them learn how to speak in to the space when they're not confident? How do I help them learn how to read and cite the book? When I'm doing board work, do they know what they should be taking notes on, right? And the student was able to observe all of those dynamics freed from the content, right? She wasn't focused on, do I understand this verb conjugation? She was focused on what's happening in this community and mapping that out and sharing it with the faculty member for dialogue. So does that help in terms of the scope of the questions? It's really, I think, readiness more so than content.
Got one right here. Hi. Thank you so much. I really think the idea is really interesting, and I like the observation piece that you were talking about. But you just mentioned helping other students in the class think about things like study skills and those sorts of things. To what extent in these partnerships do those partners engage in the class sessions themselves as sort of participant observers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the way that we have structured it is to say that it depends on how the faculty member or faculty members, if you've got a joint partnership like Sheila did, how they want to position themselves relative to student feedback. So some faculty will say, I want to hear directly from my students about what questions they have, right? Midterm feedback sessions and things like that. I want that to come to me, and the student partner is giving me feedback and my students are giving me feedback, and then we're sitting together to process that. Other partnerships have asked their students to lead mid-semester focus groups with their students or develop surveys, exam wrappers. Some pedagogical partners will hold office hours for students to come and talk about, not about the content, but about their experience in the class and how they're working with other people, or do they have clarity around what they're being asked to do? And then the student will bring that back to the faculty member for dialogue in their weekly meeting. So it can vary, and it just depends on the course specifically and the faculty member's comfort with that work. Yeah. Sheila, did you have feedback that you received from students that was gathered by your student partner?
We had Critty help us design the survey that we did, our midterm survey. So, and actually I forgot to mention, but this was during the spring of 2021. And so it was a virtual class that Critty was sitting in on. And it was really remarkable how much we learned from her going into different breakout groups. We had a bunch of group work that we had done that we designed in, and that we got really interesting observations, even about, like, you know, that prompt that you gave them before they went into the breakout room. Nobody seemed to remember what it was, and things that, you know, that that are kind of general logistical things, but then also things about, yeah, well, maybe we can go into that more later, but just like having that observer in the classroom whose job is not to support the students or to give us good or bad feedback. It's just kind of collecting the data and noticing what's happening and then bringing that to our weekly meeting. It was just a really rich addition to what would normally be a pretty kind of pedestrian conversation my co-instructor and I would have after. So it really enriched that conversation of reflection on the course.
Mhm.
Sheila, if I can kind of dovetail off that, one of the things that has resonated with me is, and I'm very eager to kind of hear all of the perspectives. So this will be a question that I'll invite all of the panelists to engage with. But if it's not an easy one either, because I think there's a lot of ways these partnerships probably affect you on a personal level. But if you were to kind of say, like, personally, how has this experience changed your own relationship to teaching or learning or kind of your identity at an institution? I just would love to hear your own personal stories about that. So maybe, Sheila, if you don't mind sharing that, and then we can go to Zach and Hope and come back to you, Sarah. That would be great.
Sure. Yeah, my experience is a little bit, you know, I had the influence of both working with students to develop this other class, being human in STEM, that was in and of itself very transformative to take kind of the momentum of a student protest where students really wanted to think about identity and structural inequities and think about how that overlays with our disciplines in STEM. But this experience with having Critty as our pedagogical partner really helped me. Well, number one, I just was like, wow, I wish I would have had this as a resource, something I can participate in as a pre-tenure person, because it was so helpful to get, I just can't say it enough, that non-judgmental observing data about what's happening in the classroom. And then to have a thought partner who really is just trying to help you succeed as opposed to evaluating you or being the co-instructor trying to jam the content through. So it was just a really supportive, validating. I would say, you know, even as a pretty experienced instructor that I was when I did this 7 years ago, whatever. Wait a minute, 2021. I'm not good at math. But it was just really nice to have somebody affirm and validate, especially because she thought with us about what we were trying to do in the class, and so she could reflect that back to us and then give us some data on it. And that was just hugely affirming, I would say. So really helped me feel humanized and validated as an instructor, and helped me kind of see the student perspective with more compassion and clarity from having this near peer person reflect that back to us.
Thanks for that, Sheila. Zach, do you want to share what you would feel, kind of how it impacted you as a student, a learner, a participant?
Yeah, definitely. I'm very lucky to have had like a couple of different pedagogical partnership relation throughout my educational career, but I definitely do think that the being human in STEM one is a really core part of my journey. And at the end, not at the end, it's throughout the being human in STEM course, and then you present it at the end. There's this action project, which is where students are asked to be observer of the not only the classroom environment, but the campus environment at our college, and asked to create some sort of change or propose a sort of change. And while I was making my campus project, I was actually formulating my own interdisciplinary major, which unfortunately at Amherst College isn't a very well structured or financially supported major. So I was having a really hard time sort of doing that on the side. And then I also was making my own campus change project where I actually, at the same time, was arguing and proposing that we needed more cross-disciplinary courses at Amherst. And I was getting all this different statistical data. I had a lot of great supporters in my HM class that were, really helping me navigate and find all the support and evidence and what they saw were the really good parts of it. And it was a very confidence boosting experience because not only was I getting support from like all of my peers and then the facilitators of the course, but then also I was getting reception from the institution itself in like the aspect of in the interdisciplinary major where I wasn't, and even in like some personal ways that I wasn't. Getting it from my class was really self-fulfilling. And then when I switched over into like my sort of facilitator role afterwards, it was a really interesting experience to sort of have to walk students through that experience of creating their own sort of projects. And me and Dr. J had a couple of different conversations of how do we give them enough different options, but still leave the doors open for all of their creativity and all of like the responsiveness for us to be able to work off of their ideas. So overall, it was just a really great way for me to actually be more connected with Amherst College and my institution and to get that support from playing off of my facilitators.
Thanks, Zach. And we've been talking a lot through the day, just the value of connection, you know, especially right now and kind of the times that we're in. So it's nice to hear that that was one of the real benefits for you. So Hope, I'm wondering, how about you? How did this experience impact you and your experience at UMaine?
Yeah, so I would say like it was interesting to hear Sheila's point of view as like the professor, and then I have my experience as being the observer and as a student. And I would say I cannot like overstate how much I learned about not only being a student and what I need in the classroom, but also about myself. It was really interesting experience for me to like be observing classes while also being a student, and I was able to really see what works in the classroom and then also implement that into my own learning, which obviously was super impactful for me, especially in my senior year after I had already done these observations. So I could see and feel the impact that it was having on my success, and also past my success, like my interest in learning, I just felt a lot more excited to go to classes because I was experiencing all of these, what was learning in my research was really impacting me as a student as well. So it was just a full circle kind of thing that really allowed me to also reflect on how much I had grown as a learner over the past 4 years, and also starting in COVID as a student, and kind of that growth and really understanding how difficult that was for me, and then being able to see how important it is to like be in person and connect with people. But yeah.
Thank you. I think about this, how, a look behind the curtain, so to say, can be scary for both the person doing the stuff behind the curtain and the one looking. But from your stories, it also really is a reminder that there is so much to be gained by pulling the curtains and willingly entering into kind of an equal partnership with this understanding that there are knowers who are going to come to this. But how about you, Sarah? What is a story of how pedagogical partnerships have changed you?
Yeah, which one? I mean, I guess I would point to two. I was thinking, what am I going to talk about? One, I would say starting with pedagogical. That was very spooky. Starting very early in my own career as an educator in a pedagogical partnership model really dramatically changed how I think about my teaching. Because from the very beginning, I was primed to think about what is the data that's informing what's working. And when I'm thinking about my classroom as a space that is always a space of inquiry, as opposed to a space that I'm trying to control and regulate, it changes how I relate to my students. It changes the kinds of questions that I ask. And so it has really shaped me as a SOTL scholar from the very beginning. The other piece I would say, and this has been reaffirmed for me, and I partner in a lot of different areas of my professional work, including partnering with experienced pedagogical partners in redesigning the pedagogical partnership curriculum for the next pedagogical partners. So it's very meta partnership. But they remind me again and again, one, just about how amazingly joyful it is to work with students on shared venture and to be curious in the classroom, right? That it brings an excitement and energy into the classroom because you're not there alone and because you want to have a conversation about it afterwards. And they remind me that the story that I'm telling about what's happening in my classroom and why students are doing what I think they shouldn't be doing is probably wrong, right? And that I need to be curious about those moments of tension or expectations that manifest differently, that's a time for me to ask students for their perspective. That's a time for me to pause. That's a time for me to reflect. And that's a time for me to be in conversation with other people, right? Because I need to understand more about our community and how we move forward or what we do next. So it's really changed how I relate to my students and how I think about myself and my purpose as an educator. So small impacts. Yeah.
So I'm gonna punt this one back to Hope and Zach, piggybacking on the joy piece. If you had to think about something that has brought you joy by being involved in these partnerships, or something that surprised you, and Hope, you said that you learned a lot about yourself. So what were those pieces, learning about yourself, about what brings you joy, about how you relate to learning, that you think are worth sharing with others?
Yeah, I would say I learned what I need in the classroom. I learned that I need to make connections with the professor and make connections with my peers. I don't learn well in an environment where I can't ask questions. And so understanding that, I really tried to make an effort after I really had a better understanding of that's what I needed in the classroom. And it kind of it seems like I should have known that before, but I just hadn't thought about it in a way that would really impact me as a student. And doing that, I also found a lot of interest in the classes I was taking, which was another surprising thing to me. I didn't think it could have that impact. And so obviously, like having more interest in the classroom was bringing me joy in the things that I was learning. And so all of those were really important for me as a student.
I think I'll just add a little bit. I think when I entered Amherst and for a good portion of the beginning of my career here, I was a very individualistic and like hyper quick. Like I wanted to get class over with. I thought my degree was something I was like, I just need to get it. And this led to me to really undervalue the community aspect that happened in a lot of the classroom. And like whenever there was group work, I was always dreading it because I was like, oh my God, like I could just do this faster by myself. Um, and I think the Being Human in STEM course model, I think just broke that a lot for me because I was hyper reliant on not only my peers, but my facilitators. And there wasn't necessarily like learning objectives to conquer. It was more so of like, well, what can we all contribute to the dialogue here to learn as a community? And I think when I really, the more educational experiences that I've had, especially taking a more educator role, and now stepping into my facilitator role as the HSTEM fellow, I'm really seeing that I actually can't offer everything that the students need because it's the students themselves that are bringing all of these great things that are actually the learning, I guess, like the learning goals of the classroom. And I can't predict what those are going to be. And I think that can be a really scary thing sometimes as an educator because you're like having to leave a lot of empty space in your curriculum. But I think you just have to have a lot of good faith that your students are actually going to be providing a lot of the really great learning experience and lessons. And obviously this has a lot more pertinence to humanities where a lot of it is rooted in lived experiences. But I think in STEM too, when you're interfacing with all these different sorts of like phenomena, the student experience and how they interpret those things is also relevant and important.
Thank you. Did you want to respond? I think that was great. How about anyone in the audience? Hi.
I was just wondering about people who are hesitant to try this, or if there's any typical stumbling blocks or big lessons learned so they can, get past it a little quicker. Maybe not, but I wondered if there's anything in common that some of you have had.
Hesitancies towards partnership. I think, so part of it goes back actually to the initial question of when we think we are open to feedback, but actually we're not open to change. And don't realize that until we're in it a little bit. And there are also conditions that limit individuals' ability to be responsive to feedback or ability to implement particular pedagogies across the type of position that you're in or where you are in your particular career. And so we do talk with students a lot about the structure of higher education and how some individuals are positioned in more precarious roles than others within institutions. To think about when particular faculty do have flexibility and agency and when they don't. And students aren't aware, speaking Lily to pulling back the curtain, students aren't aware to all of the power dynamics that we're navigating in the classroom and the identity challenges that we're navigating in the classroom and why me displaying vulnerability, right, if I'm a pre-tenure female in STEM, right, is a way more risky move, right, than some of my other colleagues in the same department. And so helping them see actually why I may be hesitant because I've got some conditions around necessary defensiveness. And naming those and being aware of those and then recognizing, can I still step into partnership in some other areas that do feel like I could make some changes or I could be more collaborative and reflexive around feedback. So there is some core self-knowledge. And that's been true in the Being Human in STEM course too, of realizing when I actually need to do some more reflection about myself and my power or not in the space. So that's one key piece, certainly. I think also helping students recognize that faculty need affirmation and they need feedback that is manageable and scalable. So sometimes faculty members will have a harder time in pedagogical partnership if their partner is making so many observations that it feels kind of like a fire hose. And that they need some support in being able to name, here's what would actually be helpful. Here's the kind of feedback that I'm looking for around this particular domain, or here's the scope of change that's possible. And that's true in all feedback relationships, right? But we don't often make that explicit. And pedagogical partnerships create the space where we need to be explicit about what we need in that relationship for it to be successful. So it's less a hesitancy and more a learning move of how do I bring in some self-transparency, recognize the conditions in which faculty and courses are operating, and then name what would be helpful and how the partnership can be structured.
While the mic is being brought to Emmanuel, I'll just add that a lot of these programs have kind of built-in training for students and for faculty to kind of learn about these steps in the process before you're actually partnering. So,
So listening to Zach said he became very comfortable, engaging pedagogical partnership when he realized that there was no grade obligations in the class. So I want to ask, with structural class like science classes and other classes where grades are, students once they are graded and then leave the class. So with the presence of like high stake assessment, how do we ensure a true, real, student faculty partnership?
So thinking about pedagogical partnerships in classes with high stakes assessment and high stress performance outcomes. Yeah, I think that's a place often where pedagogical partnerships are really beneficial, because those are often student dynamics that don't always nurture community. And that students don't always feel comfortable naming when I've lost the thread, right? And I'm so far gone, I actually don't know how to check back in. I don't know what question I need to ask. I just know I don't know stuff, right? And so how do we create conditions for students who need more support in those classes to name that, to be observed, to bring that into dialogue, and then to think about what can I shift? I'm thinking about one partnership in an advanced level math course that we supported, where the faculty member said, I have to cover all of this content at the pace that I'm covering it, or students won't be ready for the comprehensive exam, right? And I'm a pre-tenure faculty member. So I talk fast, and that's not going to change, right? Because I can't change that, right? But they had 2 pedagogical partners in the class with them. And actually, they did the pedagogical partnership program multiple times. And so they thought about, what can I shift? And one of the students said, you know, some students are talking to each other in very small groups, but you don't actually have students who are in a larger classroom community. They don't know each other, right? And the students in the back of the class, right, are the ones who seem to be disengaging more readily from class and engaging in other kinds of behaviors that suggest that they're not keeping pace with the content. What if you change where students sit, right? Which was a completely novel suggestion, right? But students get into the same pace that we do, which is they come and they sit often in the same space that they sat in day one, right? And then they engage in repetitive behaviors that are either productive or not productive for their learning without shifting those patterns. And the student just said, well, I know that I learn differently, right, when I have more eye contact, or I feel more accountable, or I'm around other people who are also acting in engaged ways. So after the midterm, the faculty member said, we're going to shake it up, right? Everybody needs to sit at least 2 rows differently from where they were before, and next to someone they haven't sat next to. And then part of the assignment, the homework assignment, so not to take away from in class because he didn't feel like he had that flexibility, was to do a reflection about how your learning and engagement changed or did not based on where you were positioned in the class. And students immediately noticed a difference, both positive and negative, in terms of their ability to self-regulate their attention and the kinds of strategies that they needed to use, right? And that activated some important metacognition, right? He then became more active in moving around the classroom, right, to get access and closeness and connect to more individuals in the class. So it shifted what he did because he noticed that it shifted what students did, right? So I name that as one example of, there may be some things that are rigidly set in a course or in a curriculum, but it doesn't mean that partnership can't change the ways in which students experience it.
So maybe another important thing to point out is how partnerships are how the students are acknowledged. So we've talked about it, if it's a course or if they're paid, but just kind of that role of the pedagogical partner sitting in the classroom making these observations, you know, what signals to them that they're valued? Anybody can talk about that question.
Sure. So in the pedagogical partnership programs, it's really important to us I think pedagogical partnership is an equity-seeking practice. And it's important to recognize that students are contributing important intellectual labor to the enterprise of teaching and learning, and to recognize that. And that they're building expertise along the way, leadership skills, feedback skills, observational skills. And so either within a credit-based system of offering the training as a course, or in a stipended system, that's been essential to all of the programs, both that I've co-run, and also other programs across the country, is that we recognize that work. And I know, Sheila, that's been essential in terms of peer facilitators and other HSTEM student partners to also recognize their contributions, right, so that they feel valued.
Yeah. So the original course with students, where students wanted to kind of co-design this course, being human in STEM, that they all got credit as for the course. Although I did it as an overload, so I didn't get credit at first. But then since then we have had different mechanisms where the department has paid to have a postback who has served as a facilitator and support for the larger program. But also we've had success with having students who aren't graduated yet being real peer facilitators in the classroom, and being paid with a TA level rate, but having more of a role than just being TAs, but really helping co-design things like Zach was talking about. So that has felt very important, to be recognizing that labor in that way.
Mhm, mhm.
Been waiting a long time.
So I have kind of two questions. The first question is there a limit on the class size that could benefit from this program, like observation? Are there like too many students? How many students are too many for a class so that they prevent this efficient communication? My second question is more personal because I realize, because I'm a faculty, I teach in both lab setting and classroom setting. So for classroom, like when I have students, about 40 students, I break them into groups to discussion, give them prompts. Some groups are very engaged, but not other groups. For instance, how do you kind of improve the situation? And I also try this kind of shift the seats so that, they can work with the students of different, like they haven't talked to before. Some students love this, but other students, they feel hesitant. They said, oh, I just get familiar with my group members, then you ask me to change. So I guess, based on your experience, how do you kind of improve this situation?
Mhm. Your first question in terms of limits on class size, there's not a limit for how you could apply a pedagogical partnership model. It may change the nature of what it is you can globally observe and the kind of feedback that you're getting. Or you just need to think a little bit differently about how I gather feedback from students. So certainly looking at like who's asking questions, who's engaging, right? Who's leaving the classroom? I will often do observation maps of just who leaves and for how long, right? And how does that relate to their level of engagement? What strategies are they using? What supports might they need? Thinking about how the faculty member moves around the classroom and doing a heat map of the faculty member, right? And how that changes the level of dialogue. So there's lots of questions that you can ask in a very large class. And might argue a pedagogical partner might be even more important in those dynamics because you cannot be the only lens on what's happening in that classroom, right? I mean, I've taught up to 450 students and I have no idea, right? That experience. And so I need help, I need partnership, I need feedback to make sure that I have avenues of supporting students who I otherwise don't have a one-on-one relationship with. So no, but also, right, it's going to influence the kinds of questions you're asking. Your question about group work and engagement, anybody else in this room struggle with group work and engagement? Yeah, absolutely. And so I would say instead of a solution-minded response, I would encourage getting some feedback from students about what are the barriers to participation? Thinking also about, have I, as an instructor, appropriately named collaboration or clearly named collaboration as one of the learning outcomes of the course? And how have we established our learning community to support that, right? Have we talked about community values? Have we talked about why it's important to collaborate across different groups? Am I rewarding it in my evaluation structure and giving them feedback on their strategies that they're using for collaboration? Are there individual differences in students in the class that I'm not aware of that limit their ability to participate, right? Is it language differences, cognitive differences, mental health challenges, or just not the same kind of readiness or trust of working with other students? And those students need support to be able to participate and meet that learning objective, but I may not know that about my students yet. So it makes me curious, right, about what's happening in that dynamic. And I would want to know more before thinking about now how might I implement a particular strategy to approach that. So being human in STEM, we focus on or identifying a number of practices that will help with collaboration. So one of the classes one year, their group project was to develop a handbook of inclusive practices that resonated for them in their classes. And a number of them were around collaborative work and having students shift who they were partnering with in lab, but also building in reflective exercises to think about how am I collaborating and how am I supporting other people in being able to collaborate with me. So there, and I'm happy to share those, but there are a number of tools that you could use once you understand what it is I'm actually trying to support. Yeah. Other thoughts or other reflections on that?
I was wondering if whoever would like to answer could talk a little bit about the timeline and time commitment. So like how much before a semester do you start? Do you go through the whole semester? Are they there every week? Are there weekly meetings or is it check-ins? Like, and then how do you wrap up? So timeline across the semester and time commitment throughout the semester.
Great. There are lots of different ways that folks run their pedagogical partnership program. So I can just talk about the way that I've done it. It's consistent with a number of different programs. And there's pedagogical partnership programs in the US and Canada, Australia, a number in Western Europe. Some early pedagogical partnerships are blossoming in Singapore. So this is not a US focused space, and this is not a me space, right? This is me learning from lots of wise people and thinking about how do we adapt these practices. So the programs that I have co-run or led, we do a semester-long training with students ahead of time. And that training involves engaging with some core pedagogical ideas, not to build them up to be pedagogical experts, but to give them some facility and key terms and ideas. So we talk about what is a learning goal. We talk about backward design. We talk about the idea of scaffolding. We talk about microaggressions. We talk about universal design for learning. We talk about transparent teaching frameworks, right? So that they have really a entry-level framework of kind of some key practices for how do we develop courses and how do we engage in redesign, right? But most of the training is on active listening and on providing feedback and on observing without judging, which is a really hard thing for humans to do, right? I won't even say students, just humans, right? And so we do practice observations where myself or another member of the team goes with a student into a faculty member's classroom. The faculty member has volunteered, right, to participate as a trainer context, and the students have consented. And we practice together, mapping out, and on the handout, you'll see on the back a couple of examples of what you might do, where you can map out who's participating. You can map kind of discussion classes. You can do a timestamp model of what was happening at 12:30. You talked about this. At 12:32, this person asked this question. In 12:34 to 12:37, you were at the board and didn't turn back around. In 12:38, you did this. I'm not judging, I'm just saying, right? And you're providing the observations back to the faculty member. So when we do the training, the student does the observation and I do the observation, and then we meet together to talk about what did you see, what did I see, and then how might we share this back with a faculty member that aligns with the goals that they said they have for their teaching and their class in a way that we think will be manageable, right? And potentially actionable. How do we invite them to be curious around these observations? And then we lead that conversation together. So they practice doing this work before they step into partnership. The faculty also have training before. It's not as intensive. It's a 1 day. Kind of here's the pedagogical partnership framework. Here's the kind of relationship that you're seeking to foster, but a lot of reflection on what is it you actually want to learn that you think a student partner could help you learn about your teaching. Where are the places that are fixed in your courses or in your pedagogy, right? And how do I make those clear to myself, at least at this point? What do I know about myself? And what's the kind of feedback that would be most helpful for you? What are the other things happening in your life that may, right, limit participation, and how can we support you in that? So preparing to step into that relationship. And then the next semester, students and faculty are paired in a course where the student, again, is not enrolled in the class, but goes to one class a week, takes observation notes, and then does a debrief 30 to 45-minute meeting with the faculty member to talk about, here's what I saw, here are some questions we've been talking about, what do you see in this data, and what do we want to focus on next week? The students then meet as a cohort every week for support from the center, and the faculty cohort also meets every other week during that partnership semester, because we've never done this before. And it feels really different to work with students in this way. And it's often helpful to talk with people across different disciplines about how am I navigating pedagogical partnership, what am I learning, right? And how am I supporting my student and myself in doing the work. And then how does it end? We do a celebration. I'm big on celebrations, big on food. And we encourage students to write a gratitude letter back to their faculty partner about what they learned and about the experience of being in that relationship. They do. They do. We encourage faculty to do it as well, but we encourage the student to start and to do that first. And then often students will continue the next semester or the next year as experienced pedagogical partners, peer mentors for the other cohort. Faculty serve as peer mentors for the next cohort of faculty. And so it ripples. And I'll say one of the biggest markers that we have of the success of this work is that after a student serves as a pedagogical partner in a class, the number of students from that class who then apply the next semester to be pedagogical partners is amazing, right? Because, and when we interview them, they say, I want to do that for somebody else, right? Because I just saw one of my peers make a transformative difference in my learning and in the learning of other students in that class. And I want to do that. I want to play that role for someone.
There's a question on this side, or maybe from Zoom. And then I would also like to maybe go back to our guests who are on Zoom.
Yes.
I got a question here on Zoom. What is the role of silence in pedagogical partnership, especially in the case of international students?
Can I get a little more context to that question?
I can ask.
What I meant by that was like, suppose you have a student who is international and doesn't talk much or doesn't want to talk much or appreciates the role of silence in their lives. So how do you make that student talk or participate or provide feedback?
I don't know if you can hear me, but we couldn't hear you. So it might be best to, if you could elaborate in the chat, and then maybe we'll come back to it in a little bit. And maybe some of the stuff we're going to talk about here in the meantime would also relate. So I wanted to come back to everyone who's on Zoom and think about, I mean, you ended this last part with students being inspired to be pedagogical partners and to really be involved in shaping learning. And to me, that would be one example of how pedagogical partnerships can transform education. And I know there's maybe some questions behind me around that as well, but I would first go to you. How do you see pedagogical partnerships contributing productive ways to transforming education? In your experience, like how have they, whether it's personal, classroom level or even institutional. Zach, you talked about that interdisciplinary major.
I'll just very briefly, and I think I alluded a bit to this of like, I think it's a very common thing for undergraduates to be very jaded towards their institution and not necessarily fully believe all of the, we care about you, we love you, we support you. Um, but I do think that when you're in a pedagogical partnership and we actually are firsthand witnessing the amount of stress that educators are going through to time that they're dedicating to your learning, and even if you may not be perceiving those outcomes, being a firsthand witness to them really does, I think, um, sort of lift that veil and get you to see the authentic actually experience of these people who are within the institution, and also to parse through that the institution and then the educators within it are not the same thing, and that there can be changes that happen in one level and not the other, or it could be a trickle up effect and we actually can get change at the top level. And I think the our HSTEM projects are one example where students are actually pitching changes to the whole institution. And I think that is just like a very specific form of pedagogical partnership that is able to change institutions.
I would say also, in my work, for my thesis, I interviewed first year students, and they were given the opportunity to reflect on their learning experiences. And I found that they were really knowledgeable about what works for them and what contributes to their success as students. And I kind of thought, and with Lily and stuff working on my thesis, that like if students were given the opportunity to talk with their professors more about just their learning experience, not really the course content, but what works for them as students, could be really transformative in their learning, and also the professors' teaching styles too. So even though I didn't experience that firsthand as a student, I saw it in other students, and kind of can see it in the work that you all are doing with the Humans in STEM program.
Emma, is there anything you'd like to add, or should we see about clarifications in the chat or other questions in the...
Well, I guess for me, I think the transformative part is really the humanizing that happens both directions, that students can really see behind the scenes, and then having feedback from a student who is seeing that is very, like I said before, validating, and kind of helped me kind of reconnect with that aspect of like, oh, the effort I'm putting in is being seen, and the data I'm getting back can help me do better. It's not telling me that I'm bad or not good enough. So that's one aspect of it. And then I think just also the more that this power sharing that Sarah talked about can happen, the more that both can feel invested in not just the relationship, but also in and believing, like Zach was saying, in this thing of education that we're doing together, and that we really do mean the things that our mission statements say, and that we are invested in everybody having the learning experience that they need to have. So yeah, and then I just wanted to, because I did see the international student question, I just wanted to jump in there and say that the question that Meta was asking about, how do you make the classroom inclusive for students who communicate through silence? There are some students who prefer silence instead of voicing their thoughts aloud. And I think in terms of the pedagogical partner program, I think that training that the students get, and I know there's been a number of international students who have been pedagogical partners through the Amherst program, and probably Elon as well, that kind of gives a very structured way to be able to participate, that doesn't rely on having to voice your own thoughts necessarily. It's gives a framework for, observing and then reporting back on what you observe. So it seems like it could be a confidence builder to you have a very structured set of things that you're doing. Thanks.
While the mic is coming, I saw another question in the chat popped up about how do you get a partner? And maybe we can come back to that.
You've got a convert.
Yes, what is the process if we would like to request a partner?
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'll answer this quickly and then I'll hand it to you, Claudia. So TBD, great question. I mean, I think a lot of why we wanted to have this conversation is that we're really interested in understanding how faculty at UMaine could see a tool like this benefiting them, what would be a space where partnerships would be of value. And so we see this as the beginning of a conversation. This was going to be something I closed on, but I'll just do it now and to say that we are hoping in the fall to kind of to start some programs, introducing these concepts, thinking through what it could look like here at UMaine, a little bit of visioning. It would be great to do that in partnership with students. And so I see this as the beginning of a conversation. So I think that was from Shane. So just stay tuned and we'll be reaching out to folks afterwards. So if you're interested in continuing the dialogue, we'll get in touch with you that way. So Claudia?
Well, you were talking about measuring the rate of success. So I'm thinking, how does a previous relationship between the observer and the instructor impact the success of the program? Because thinking maybe we could share in UMaine observers, but then I'm thinking if they jump from one to other, would it become a nuance for them? Like it's not a fun or joyful thing anymore. So those previous relationships between instructor and learners have impact the results.
So when we first piloted, we did a number, and I won't go into the details of all of this, but we did a number of things to assess institutional readiness before developing our pedagogical partnership program and design some pedagogical partnerships around institutional initiatives where student voice would help us move an initiative forward, and the provost would be very happy when that happened. So we did that. And then we piloted a pedagogical partnership program where faculty identified their own pedagogical partners to try to build comfort for faculty stepping into that role for the first time, right, to help build energy. And that creates both comfort in the existing relationship, but also some challenges for students and for faculty. Because the existing relationship that enters into partnership is one that is typically a traditional hierarchical one. So it becomes harder to then shift that dynamic to one of mutual contribution, right? It also, I've had one pedagogical partnership where student and faculty were paired and they knew each other previously. And the faculty member was not distrusting of the affirmation, but didn't take it quite as seriously. He often would say, oh, she's just saying that because she knows me before. And so she's just being really nice, right? As opposed to saying, actually, this is really working quite well within this particular context. So we have worked to pair students who, as much as possible, are not experts in the discipline that the course is being offered in and have not worked with the faculty member before. Because it allows you to observe, as I said before, the context without being stuck in the content. Now, your question of when you partner with other people over time, that, at least in my experience, only serves to enrich the skills that students can bring to partnership because they have multiple models now of how do I navigate providing feedback right? Responding to how feedback was received and vice versa. And then they have multiple rich relationships with faculty on campus. So that's been a win for sure. And lots of students have continued over time in the program. Yeah.
Question behind you.
So first off, I want to say a big thanks to our panelists for these wonderful insights. So my question is, who has power in the classroom, and how does this power shape what students learn and how they participate in the classroom? Thank you.
Clarifying question. When you say students, do you mean the pedagogical partner? Okay.
Does anybody else want to take that? Who has power in the classroom, and how does power shape what happens in the classroom?
Well, I guess in my pedagogical partnership experience, my co-instructor and I were the ones who were running and facilitating the class, but we were speaking every week with the pedagogical partner who was giving us feedback, and we were looping her in as a thought partner of like, oh, maybe we could try this based on this observation you had. And so the kind of structure of it was being shaped by all of us, but actually in the partner, her role was really in the classroom, her role was really to be that observer. So yeah, but the power sharing happened in our meetings and in our inviting her feedback and responding to it and taking action based on it.
Yeah. One of the reflections from Sheila's co-teacher around the partnership that I love is, he said, Critty was their student partner's name, still is her name, said she was like a Jedi Knight, right? We'd have all these observations and we'd be talking in all these loopy ways back and forth, and she'd just go, that. And we'd go, yes. Right? And so having someone else, I think, in terms of thinking about power, right? In a shared space of how are we collectively both being curious and then also creating avenues for students to help us direct our energies and our focus. And yeah, I love that.
And kind of a follow-up to that has your understanding of how power moves in the classroom changed by doing pedagogical partnerships? And by that, I mean, between educators and students, among students, kind of who holds space in what ways? Does anyone want to take that? Or we can just like put a pin on it, and there are more questions behind me, so.
Well, I think Zach, you got into this in your introduction about how like having to leave space, like it's a little bit, it's vulnerable to leave space to partner, but you said
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, sorry, I just don't feel like I have a very well articulated answer to this. But I definitely do. I think for me, what this experience had elucidated was that there's like a very clear distinction between power and authority in the classroom, and that power is something that you can actually have meaningful change in fluctuating, especially in in a pedagogical partner relationship. You really can elevate students to a place where their power is almost equal with the professors or the facilitators, but the authority of what actually ends up being produced in the classroom, like does the professor actually change what they do, the authority of what actually happens, the structure of the institution and all of those sorts of things, that is relatively rigid. And so you really do have to give students the opportunity to exercise their power if you actually want any sort of change to happen in an authoritative way. I'm not sure if that's a helpful answer.
That's pretty good, Zach.
Hi. So I've taken a lot of STEM classes in my short time being alive, and I found that in STEM classes, the way that they're taught tends to be very much, I am imparting knowledge on you, and you can only guess that the professors, when they were in school, were taught the same way, and who knows how far back that goes. So how do you construct knowledge together with the students and break free of those rigid ideas of what it means to teach science, technology, engineering, and math? And is it hard for professors who have been taught those like specific one Western way of teaching STEM to open that up?
So many STEM people in the room.
There are.
And they're nodding.
So I'd love to hear, maybe this is an avenue to expand a little bit about the Being Human in STEM initiative, because I think that was actually one of the main outcomes of that was new models of teaching. So I'm gonna open, like, maybe through that example, we can address some of those.
Yeah, I can start really briefly. I feel like Dr. J, you'll have a lot more to say, but I think one way I always think about it, especially in a STEM context, is that rather than positioning educator, I guess, again, as like this authority of imparting and banking knowledge inside students, rather as like a tour guide that's like leading you through a hiking trail of knowledge. And that if your student points at something and says, that's interesting to me, a bad tour guide would be like, don't go there. That looks boring. Let's stay on this well-beaten path. But a more responsive educator might be like, that is interesting. Let's go down that avenue. Let's see where that goes. And I think the Being Human in STEM course is a really good example of that, because right now in the course, we have me, who's just graduated. We have an English professor and also a poet, and then Dr. J, who's a protein scientist and a chemist. And so it's really interesting how all these sorts of expertise weave together, and that we are all leading our sort of tour together. And George, our English poet, will lead us in one direction that no one sort of would have anticipated. And it's like that very rich, enriching perspective on STEM. And then Dr. J will take it through her lived experience and her protein science perspective. And so I think it's leaving that sort of flexibility, as I was talking about, open.
Yeah, that was really nice, Zach. I guess, we're not, with Being Human in STEM, we're not necessarily we're making that space to kind of have those conversations and explore what it is to have different ways of knowing, what it is to invite our whole selves into the classroom, and just kind of trying to build community so we can embrace really the messiness of being imperfect humans trying to come together and learn from and with each other in a discipline or set of disciplines where so many of us have been excluded because of our identities. And so so the HSTEM class gives us that space, and then these action projects, including what Sarah alluded to earlier, this curricular handbook of inclusive resources, inclusive practices. That is something that the students then came up with, and then some of us faculty and staff added our expertise to, and now that's a resource that any STEM or any faculty member can draw on to develop practices that are more inclusive in a standard STEM class. But it's really, one of the things we talk about in STEM is in HSTEM is kind of the disconnect between what faculty really want our students to learn and thrive, and yet our students are not experiencing our classrooms as inclusive. And another disconnect is really that faculty and staff don't necessarily have reward systems that help us, or onboarding systems that help us to really develop those abilities to have an inclusive classroom while also getting all this content out that students need for their majors, for pre-med, et cetera. And so, so I think the idea of trying to humanize all stakeholders in the room is part of what Being Human in STEM is about. And I think, yeah, there aren't easy answers. And that's why it's, the more we can have a partnership and thinking about how to make this work for all of us, and having the classroom be a space of inquiry and not having to be in control, like Sarah was talking about, the better. So hopefully that addresses it somewhat.
And we do have a lot of STEM folk in the room. So does anybody else want to share their experience?
I would like to continue a little bit, if I can create a thread on the previous question. Last semester, I had the opportunity to teach a course for CIE seniors that is called Geotechnical Engineering. That was thanks to my advisor Ben on his sabbatical. So the course was particularly challenging for me because it was the course that I got my lowest grade when I was in the undergrad. And part of why that happened at that time is because I couldn't really understand very well all the concepts. It was just not for me. I couldn't understand. Indeed, though I was never going to be on that path, but here I am. So part of the course here in UMaine and all around the world and in all the textbooks about geotechnical engineering includes drawing circles as a technique, a very archaic technique to solving a particular set of equations. Something that came up like in the 1800s as a useful way because it saves you a lot of lengthy and tedious calculations. But at this point, I also felt it was archaic because now we have computing power, calculators. So why we keep just drawing circles? On top of that, it was also tedious for me when I did it because I'm not particularly good at drawing. So the accuracy of your answer at the end depended on how good you were with the ruler and the compass, and that was taking me a lot of time. So I thought, let's introduce these folks with a tool that will do it for them, and they rather focus their attention on the conceptualization of what they are doing rather than on the activity of just drawing the circle. So I presented them with a tool called Desmos. It's a graphing calculator and something that can do a lot more than that. And I was pretty confident, like I was doing great. Like this fold will, I'm just saving them a lot of time. They will be so successful in what they were doing. And part of my inexperience was not checking through half the way how were they doing with the app. At the end of the course, I realized they were actually not using it because they were confused by it or they just didn't know how to use it properly, and that they were actually drawing the circles by hand because it was easier for them. So long preamble, but the question will be phrased like, do you have similar experience that you would like to share about something that you were like very confident and that you were doing it well, properly, or something that you were confident was working, but it was actually not?
And especially if it was something that a partner illuminated for you that you wouldn't have seen with the absence of having that partner in the classroom.
Julia, did you want to answer the question?
Sure. So when I teach introductory biology, the large enrollment classes here at UMaine, and when I first got this position, I got the slides and I had all the materials laid out. I felt super confident with going through it all. And then the students are just tanking on the tests. And I was very fortunate to have a mentor that helped me to understand how to kind of like read the meta information on the exams. And I started down this uncomfortable but really rewarding process of really looking at my assumptions that I was teaching and the students were learning. And it was to address your question about in STEM, just going through this historical process of teaching the way folks have taught for hundreds of years in academia. And I really took the time to examine my assumptions and try to understand how and where I was missing the process that could lead to learning rather than just running through the content that I was super excited about and everyone was just kind of like in the room. And I think a lot of that comes to this point of like, what is it that sparks that curiosity? I know we've talked a lot about curiosity, but what's the curiosity where like this tool works so great for me and then students never used it? And that realization, or whatever that question is, whatever that realization is such a wonderful opportunity to engage with a pedagogical partner or a peer who also has a similar question. And I think, you know, your example is such a great spark of curiosity that could lead to the next set of questions that you work with students on together. And I think that's what a lot of this is exciting and about.
So I have to be a bit mindful of the time. I think we end at 7, is that correct? So, and so I thought maybe as we're wrapping up the conversation, and this might be a difficult question to answer in a couple of words or less, but to kind of anyone, like, I'll give you an option. Either what would be the key elements of bringing a partnership like this to a new context? Like, what are the really important things to consider? And or what do you think is most important for leadership at such an institution to know about these programs? And so anyone here can chime in on an answer, but I'll also ask for our panelists if they want to contribute that as kind of some closing thinking about how might we bring something like this to UMaine. Simple question.
I can start. I think just in a simple way, being open to change. I think a lot of people, like we said, have been teaching and learning in the same ways for a long time. So if we're gonna try to implement something like this, I think just trying to be open to a different way and open to change.
Thanks, Hope. I do want to say, if you're in the room or if you're on Zoom, there are note cards around. So if you wanted to write down an answer to one of those questions and just leave it for us, that would be helpful. If you wanted to post in the chat as well, what are the key elements of pedagogical partnerships, or what does leadership need to know about it? So we hope that you'd let us know one way or another. Sorry for that interjection. I'm getting a signal that it's 7:01. So,
Yeah,
I-
sure.
I'll just jump in. I think that you could start small, like, you know, I run a research group with my undergraduates, and I'm constantly experimenting with power sharing and, you know, giving them like, well, you plan the agenda for group meeting next time, or you run our beginning stretch of the day that we do every day in the summer, or so that there could be small ways that you could do some power sharing. One of our HSTEM colleagues at Davidson, actually in her Being Human in STEM class, rotates who's assigned to do the icebreaker at the beginning of class among students. And so I think maybe one takeaway is that you could start experimenting with this in a pretty small step way. And then the thing for leadership to know, I would say, is that this experience of pedagogical partnership really feeds us, both students and faculty. And so it's really helping us, like we've said before, experience that promise or potential that our educational missions have us striving for. So that's what I would share.
yeah, and I also do want to say in closing that one thing that another team that has run through these conversations, and Sheila, you brought it up earlier, is just like in terms of like in connecting to starting small, the abundance of data that we have every time we are in a classroom, and how much what a part of community building can be when we include others in understanding what happens as data and helping us process that as data and inform our teaching and learning. The data and community don't have to be on two opposite spectrum ends of the spectrum.
I see real hope in pedagogical partnership as a practice for the dynamics that we're trying to navigate today in our classrooms. And so in terms of messaging to administration or just to us as we're thinking about how do we name the value add of this work, that how do we bridge senses of otherness, right? Of disconnect, of alienation. And it often comes from not knowing or not seeing the other, right? As a human or as someone whose perspective could influence the way that I teach and the way that we are all learning together and from each other. And so I see this more than ever as an important way of moving into the classroom and through teaching and learning with our students to support all of our students in thriving and to support faculty in feeling connected in a meaningful way to the classroom again.
Thank you, Sarah. So I just want to take a minute to thank Sheila and Zach and Hope and Sarah for coming here and sharing your stories, to all of you for joining us this evening and sharing your time and perspective, and especially to the library for hosting. So continue the conversation. We're here and we want to kind of see where this can go, and happy to answer additional questions. So thank you everybody so much.